welcome everyone. If you are unfamiliar, I'm Amanda Egan, the Director of Patient Engagement and Clinical Programs with the Runkswin Research Program. I'm here to kick off today's webinar called Can Dietary Changes Reduce Blood Cancer Risk? Many individuals and families in our community live with an increased lifelong risk of developing blood cancers. And we understand that people are eager for evidence-based strategies that may help reduce inflammation and support long-term blood health. So we hope today's conversation will help answer some of those questions on this topic for you. So before I introduce our esteemed speaker, I'd like to cover a couple of quick housekeeping notes. So during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A icon, which it should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and just pull that up and type your questions in at any time. Those can just be there running, and we'll begin to answer them at the end of Dr. Shah's presentation. And then you can also submit your questions anonymously through that link, so your name will not appear anywhere. Regardless, only we can see your name, and I'll read your questions aloud without identifying you. So now, I'm especially pleased to introduce Dr. Urvi Shah, a hematologic oncologist and myeloma specialist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. What makes Dr. Shah's work uniquely important for our community is that uniquely important in general, is that she has studied diet not just in a general wellness context, but in a precancerous condition called MGUS, which has a very high risk for progressing to multiple myeloma, a type of blood cancer. And this early risk stage closely mirrors the space many individuals with RUNX1 are living in, that period in which a blood cancer may or may not develop. So further, she has 6 dietary intervention trials in the Nutrivention program that are ongoing or completed that will collectively enroll over 600 participants. Her research is among the few studies that have successfully explored whether a specific dietary approach may help slow progression toward blood cancer. And what makes her work, also makes her work especially meaningful, is that it's deeply personal. During her medical training, Dr. Shah was diagnosed with cancer herself. And like many patients, she found herself asking what role diet and lifestyle might play in her health. So that experience helped really inspire her research and her commitment to finding answers that can help patients feel more informed and empowered. So Dr. Shah is also nationally recognized for this work and has received several major early career research honors, including the American Society of Hematology Scholar Award and the AACR Clinical Research Early Career Award. So please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Urvi Shah.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that warm introduction, and really excited to be with you all for the next hour. I'm going to share my slides, and I suppose you can see them.
They are, let's see, they are coming up. Yep, we can see them now, and I will go away and let you take it from here. Thanks.
Great. So as Amanda mentioned, a lot of our work is in different blood cancers and not in like leukemia or myeloid disorders, but we are doing some early studies in that space. But we've not done anything yet with RUNX1 FPD as a diagnosis. So I would know that this is very much, we don't know how well it translates to this disorder yet. What food or supplements can I take? I think it's one of the most likely asked questions and the least likely answered by oncologists or even doctors. And so I do think that dietary research and nutrition infrastructure is really an unmet need in health in general. When we asked patients who had pre-cancer diagnoses and cancer diagnoses, like, do you have questions around this topic? You can see that majority had questions. Majority said the oncologist did not address it. And if the oncologist gave recommendations, they attempted to follow it. So when doctors give us advice, we do want to try to understand and follow that. And what we also see is that patients self-reported that after this diagnosis, they tried to change their health, the foods they ate to healthier foods and reduced red meat and junk food. And what I'll say is I was surprised to see this because I thought that, unless someone's telling them to, they're probably not going to make significant changes. But you can see that when people face a difficult diagnosis, many will make changes. The World Cancer Research Fund has 10 guidelines to basically reduce cancer risk and prevent risk of cancer. And what you can see is 6 out of the 10 are actually around diet. And the way they come up with these guidelines is they look at thousands and thousands of papers across the world that are published and say, what are the common themes that are coming out of this, and where is the strongest evidence, and what should we recommend? So you can see here that they talk about eating a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans, limiting fast food, processed foods, red and processed meat, sugary drinks, and alcohol. And they don't talk about supplements as a mode for cancer prevention. Remember that these factors, physical activity and diet, are the basis and most important, the pillars of lifestyle medicine. Supplements cannot fix a poor diet or lack of physical activity. So what we saw was that only a third of participants even knew about this. So many don't even know about this, which is an issue, I think, that most do not. But how about if a person already has high risk genes and high risk for cancer? So they have genetic risk predisposition like BRCA mutations or RUNX1 or any others. Can lifestyle changes modify cancer risk in those who already have bad genes for risk of cancer? So this actually, I find this data quite encouraging and helps empower patients, because what you can see here is first they divided the patients into, these are patients with breast cancer, and they divided them into, these are patients who they're following for the outcome of breast cancer. They divided them into low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk based on their genetic risk for breast cancer. Then they looked at their lifestyle and they said, is it unfavorable, intermediate, or favorable? And then they categorized them within each genetic risk group what their lifestyle is. So they're basically looking at the interaction between lifestyle and genetic risk. What you can see is that those with bad genes or high genetic risk, and they had a favorable lifestyle, actually had a significant improvement in risk of breast cancer, and almost basically are reaching a risk similar to the intermediate category in some ways. So it is possible that lifestyle can modify or modulate some of the risk. You can see that throughout all risk groups that lifestyle is making a difference. And this is in colorectal cancer. So the same thing, basically, participants are followed over time to see if they develop colorectal cancer. And what they divided them is into genetic risk scores of low, intermediate, and high, and then lifestyle scores of healthy, intermediate, unhealthy. In those with bad genes and unhealthy lifestyles, their risk of cancer was about 9%. When they had bad genes but a healthy lifestyle, their risk was 5.5%. So that's all like a little more than half, but it's a significant reduction of almost 4%. And you can see that these people with good lifestyle and bad genes are doing similar to the intermediate category. And what's more is that the benefit for lifestyle seems to be much higher in those with bad genes compared to those with good genes for cancer, right? You can see that here the difference is only about 1% or 2%, whereas here it's 4%, suggesting that high genetic risk could modify or benefit more than those with low risk with these modifiable factors. While those are just association studies following patients over time, can it be interventions actually reduce cancer risk? And these are very, very hard studies to do because it takes decades to develop cancer, so you have to follow patients over time. What they did is, in this study, they gave patients resistant starch, half of them, and the other half received placebo. And then they followed them for 20 years over time. And what they saw was that those that got resistant starch, there was no difference in colorectal cancer. Remember, I forgot to mention, but these are patients with Lynch syndrome. This is also a hereditary condition that increases the risk for colorectal cancer and some other non-colorectal cancers too. And then they looked and followed up over time, and they saw that the non-colorectal cancers were actually significantly lower in the group that got the resistant starch compared to placebo over time. So it suggests that maybe this intervention could reduce cancer risk over time, even in those with a hereditary predisposition to it, and at least some types of cancer, if not all. In RUNX1, what we do know is that the RUNX1 deficient bone marrow neutrophils are a major source of elevated TNF production, so that's inflammation. And this RUNX1 loss activates the immune system that primes these neutrophils to hyper-respond to stimulation. So there's more inflammation in the bone marrow or the immune system that is present. And some of that inflammation may be driving some of these allergic and GI symptoms and immunologic. So this is from a paper a few years ago showing that majority of patients have some of these allergic symptoms, eczema and autoimmune diseases, and as also GI symptoms as well. So could addressing lifestyle factors in RUNX1 reduce inflammation, gastrointestinal immune effects, and risk of progression? Of course, I want to be very clear, this has never been studied and is something I think we should hopefully study in the future, but we're going to look at data from other cancers that we have studied and what we've seen so far, and this is food for thought to think about if maybe it could. So now I'm going to shift into talking about dietary patterns and cancer risk, and then how the microbiome, the immune system plays a role in that. And then we'll talk about some dietary intervention trials and what we've seen and how we could modulate these factors. So thinking about the dietary patterns, there's the whole food diet or plant-based diet and a ketogenic. I think these are the most common diets you will see studied in cancer. And what surprised me was that these are very diametrically opposite diets, and we are studying them for the same purpose of lowering cancer risk. And what you see is that a whole food plant-based diet or a high fiber plant-based diet is rich in fiber, and fiber basically can reduce intestinal transit time, reduce time for these chemicals or toxins to interact with the colon, so reduce colon cancer. Also, the flavonoids or chemicals can have anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects. You have butyrate, which is produced by the microbiome. This is a molecule that has anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects, so it reduces inflammation and reduces cancer risk as we have more of it. And then, of course, if we're eating a healthy fiber-rich diet, we see reduction in weight, in insulin levels, insulin-like growth factor, and all of which may affect cancer risk. On the other hand, ketogenic diets come from the premise. One thing is that low carbohydrate diets we talk about would be things where we are avoiding sugar or carbohydrates. So that reduces inflammation. So there's less glucose and improved insulin weight and inflammation. But often the challenge, I think, with a ketogenic diet or a low carbohydrate diet, it's very difficult. It's not physiologic because we have to get ketosis, you have to eat such less carbohydrates that it is hard for people to sustain. So many people who think they're doing ketogenic diets don't get the effect of the ketone bodies, but they are actually just doing low carbohydrate diets, which would have these benefits. Remember, in carbohydrates too, we have refined carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Refined ones are things like cake, cookies, sugar, refined flours, and we want to avoid those in any healthy diet. So a whole food plant-based diet is also avoiding refined carbohydrates, and so would a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet. But the difference is that in a whole food diet, we are not eliminating complex carbohydrates, and these are basically the ones that are fiber rich foods and have significant benefits on the microbiome. Often when people are doing ketogenic or low carb, they're eliminating all carbohydrates, and so they lose the benefit of the fiber-rich foods, and they may not always see the benefit of the ketone bodies that have anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects, because as I said, it's hard to sustain long-term. So what surprised me was that when we look at population studies, majority of studies show that people who eat more plant-based diets actually have less cancer. But when I looked at trials that were actually being done in cancer patients, the majority were ketogenic diet trials and very few with plant-based diets. And so that surprised me. We're seeing one thing in the population association studies, and we're studying something else when we're actually normally we should be studying what we see as an observation. Another aspect was another type of diet is what we call intermittent fasting, fasting mimicking diets, calorie restriction. And I think that helps basically to lower weight, reduce IGF-1, ketone bodies, reduce inflammation. But I think diet quality is much more important than just fasting. So if a person's going to do fasting but eat really unhealthy during the time that they eat, I don't think the benefit is as much as you would get if you are also changing diet quality to improve it as well. So next, thinking about the microbiome, just remember we are more microbiome than human cells. So we have about 30 trillion human cells and 38 trillion bacterial cells. However, the bacteria are really tiny, so by weight, it's a really small part of us compared to the human cells. But because they are so abundant in us, we are just scratching the surface and realizing that they are necessary for health and disease and really affect a lot of broad aspects of our health. And concepts around microbiome health, one that you will see is microbiome diversity. So think about a rainforest, which is very diverse in the types of species of animals, birds, plants, compared to a plantation of any one tree that is very not diverse in terms of its environment. What we want for the microbiome is something like a rainforest that is quite diverse. And we see time and again in many studies in cancer and otherwise that higher diversity is associated with better health. So is it possible that we could improve our gut microbiome diversity to improve survival and reduce inflammation and other aspects? So one of the biggest drivers of microbiome health is dietary patterns, and the good part is that our microbiome is modifiable, dietary patterns are modifiable. We're born with our genetics, but we're not born with our lifestyle, and those are things we can actually do something about. So when we look at microbiome studies, one of them asked a question: how many different plant foods do you eat in a week? And can we from that extrapolate or tell if the microbiome is healthier or not? So what they showed was that those who ate more than 30 plants compared to those who ate less than 10 plants per week had a significant difference in these good bacteria that make butyrate, and also the antibiotic resistance genes were lower. So just by changing how many plants per week a person was eating, they could show that there was a difference in the microbiome. So one thing we can do is try to aim to get that variety of plant foods. When they talk about 30 plants, they don't mean eating broccoli 30 times a week. They mean eating 30 different types. So like broccoli, cabbage, green beans, nuts, seeds, and each different type is counted once. We are all creatures of habit, often eating the same ones. So this is a call to basically go out of your comfort zone and try to get at least 30 in a day, and that could be one of the ways to improve microbiome health. Another study, this was in healthy individuals, where they asked them to increase dietary fiber intake. So remember, in the general US population, less than 5% of the US population gets enough dietary fiber. So 95% plus are actually not getting enough dietary fiber. So one thing they did here was basically just ask participants to increase fiber intake by just 20 grams more per day, and then look at what happens to the microbiome. They saw changes in the function of the microbiome. They saw changes in the immune system in the short time. And they also saw fermented foods where they did another part of the study was looking at fermented foods. So they asked the participants to add 6 servings per day for 4 weeks. And they showed that the diversity of the microbiome improved, and they also showed that inflammation reduced. Again, 4 weeks of just a dietary change can change the microbiome and the immune system. So thinking back to the vegan and ketogenic, or the plant-based and the ketogenic diets, you can see here that this was a study done in the at NIH, where they basically asked patients to go and stay for 4 weeks in what we call a metabolic chamber. So every food they ate was monitored. So it's a really rigorous study. And they wanted to compare low-fat diets to low-carb diets. And then they did a crossover. So those who got the low fat then got the low carb, and vice versa. And it was only 2 weeks long for each aspect of it. What you see is that the low fat diet, which is basically the plant-based diet, and had weight loss, which was, both diets had weight loss, but the ketogenic diet had more weight loss. But then you would say, then I'd ask you, like, does it matter what kind of weight we lose, or is it just okay to, as long as we're losing weight? I think it is important the type of weight we lose as well. So you can see here that they looked at what kind of weight these patients were losing, or these individuals. And fat-free mass means that they're losing water or muscle because they're not losing fat. And the low-carb diet, because it's a high-fat diet, actually led to not fat loss, but muscle loss and water loss. Whereas the low-fat diet, which is the vegan diet, actually led to fat loss and not muscle or water loss. And so this tells us that, how we change our dietary patterns and how we lose weight can also impact which parts of our body or what aspects of weight we are losing. Then they looked at how does the immune system change with just 2 weeks of the diet, and they showed that actually both diets led to a change in many different immune cells. And that's a good thing to show that even short interventions can actually improve the immune system. They showed there are some differences where the plant-based diet maybe improved the innate immune system more, and the pathways that are associated with antiviral immunity. So now that we know that diet affects the microbiome, diet affects the immune system, what about a clinical outcome of infection? Can dietary patterns reduce severity of infection and the kinds of infection? So this study was done looking at during the COVID pandemic. They asked basically healthcare workers to fill out a dietary survey so they knew what they ate, and then they categorized them into different dietary patterns. They followed them over time and said who got more COVID or less COVID. And what they showed was that those who were eating the plant-based diets actually had 73% lower odds of moderate to severe COVID, so less COVID. And that makes sense from the prior study where I showed you there's enhanced antiviral immunity and innate immune system that may help with fighting the infections. And the high protein and low carb diets actually had the opposite effect. And if one study wasn't enough, this is another study where much larger, but they basically calculated the score, a healthy plant-based diet index. And the higher the score, the healthier the diet, and the lower the score, the worse. And they showed that those who had the higher scores, irrespective of their socioeconomic status, they actually did better and had less severe and risk of COVID compared to those with the lower diet scores. So now just thinking on a population level, can dietary patterns affect cancer risk? These are 3 studies from UK, USA, and France, so very different countries' backgrounds. And they're showing very consistent things, that eating more plant foods seem to have less risk of cancer. Now, they categorized patients in different ways. This one did vegans, vegetarians, seafood eaters, meat eaters. This one did something similar. This one used the plant-based diet score. So a higher score means that you're eating more plant foods, but it doesn't mean that a person is fully 100% eating plant foods. And they show about a 15 to 20% reduced risk in all of these patients. Elevated BMI is another risk factor for cancer. And you can see the figure here showing you that there are 13 cancers clearly associated with obesity because there's sufficient evidence. I would say that this is the ones with sufficient evidence. That doesn't mean that other cancers may not be associated. It's just that it hasn't been studied enough. It could be because it's a rare cancer or there's not enough evidence. What you see here is this side is a condition called MGUS, which is a precancerous condition that can, in some patients, progress to the blood cancer multiple myeloma. Those patients with this precancer condition who had a normal weight had half the risk of progression than those who had an elevated BMI. So this ratio, hazard ratio of 2, basically means there's double the risk of progression for those who are obese compared to normal weight. Knowing all of this, that these factors affect cancer risk, affect the immune system, I thought that it would be important for us to think and study this in really pre-cancer states. So as hematologists and oncologists, we have this opportunity for cancer prevention to address it early on with low-risk interventions. So in these pre-cancer states, as I said, MGUS and smoldering myeloma, you'll hear these words throughout the talk, but they are pre-cancer states that increase risk for the blood cancer multiple myeloma. As the disease progresses, there's more genomic alterations, but also immune dysfunction. And these are modifiable factors I showed you that affect immune function. So is it possible that we can tilt the scale if we improve all these factors, enhance immune function? Can we delay cancer for some of these patients? So that was the basis of our Nutrivention trial. We gave participants 12 weeks of high fiber plant-based meals and 24 weeks of coaching. We followed them for 1 year. These were participants with MGUS or smoldering myeloma, so they were not on any treatment for cancer, and they had a BMI over 25. What you can see is this is examples of some of the food we sent, and we looked at adherence. First, so their initial adherence was similar to the US population, maybe actually slightly better, but you can see that about 20% of their calories were coming from unprocessed plant foods. 12 weeks later, during when we provided the food, it improved to 90% of their calories coming from unprocessed plant foods. 1 year later, it was still pretty high at 60%, way better than 20%, suggesting that these participants made long-term changes. You can also see that these participants lost about 7% weight and sustained that. What's more is quality of life improved, so they felt better too. Because many people feel like dietary changes can be difficult, and so we wanted to ask these patients, like, after we've guided you and all of this, was it difficult? And surprisingly, none of them said it was difficult, and they said it was easy or somewhat easy. And you can see here that they saw improvements in many different aspects of their health. Metabolic aspects such as cholesterol, diabetes, confidence, depression, anxiety, energy, sleep, arthritis, GI issues, and some participants were able to stop medications, saving a median of $65 a month. In this study, since this may be relevant to patients with RUNX1, again, I don't know if it would work for RUNX1, but we had some patients who had one patient who had really bad eczema with like these red spots all over her face that would develop. And she did this study and that eczema subsided because I think that, reducing the inflammation may have helped. We also had other patients who had allergies that also improved and felt better after being on the study. So we looked at the disease trajectory. So this is basically the protein that we follow in the blood for this precancer and cancer. There is a protein that we can track levels for, similar to like in prostate cancer, they track a PSA number. So we see that the number was rising in these two patients, and it seems to have stabilized or slowed down after and during the intervention. This was very exploratory as an analysis because we didn't have enough patients to study this in. Many of them had very low level disease or stable disease or new diagnosis, so we didn't have numbers before. Thinking about cancer risk markers that are associated with risk of progression, we've talked about some of them, but insulin levels also dropped. So despite them not changing the amount of carbohydrates they were eating, you can see insulin levels went down. This is because they are eating more complex carbohydrates and fiber-rich foods and avoiding refined carbohydrates. And diabetes and high insulin levels are also known to be associated with increased cancer risk. So if we can improve that, maybe we can lower cancer risk. Gut microbiome diversity. So this is, I showed you in detail why a higher diversity may be better. And you can see that this improved, but what's more is it sustained 1 year out too. Butyrate producers, those bacteria that make this molecule with anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects, also increased over time. Thinking about inflammation, these participants, so C-reactive protein is a marker in the blood that we can follow for inflammation. And you can see that this dropped by about more than half in these participants who it was elevated in. What's more is we looked at all participants in the study, whether it was elevated or not, and we saw a significant drop in in the whole population over time. You can also see neutrophil count dropped a bit, and this dropped because there's less circulating inflammation. So there's less need for these neutrophils to circulate and do the work. We also looked at different types of immune cells, and this is a little too much detail for you, but what I can tell you is that there was a shift in the immune cells in the blood such that there were more anti-inflammatory cells and less inflammatory cells, suggesting really like the immune system is also moving. Then what we did is we looked at the bone marrow. So these bone marrow is where our cells are made, the immune cells. So it's really looking at the source of these cells and is that changing at all? So the gray lines are basically telling you the number of cells before the intervention, and the green lines are 1 year after. And you can see that these granulocyte monocyte progenitors, so they are basically the cells that make neutrophils, the type of white blood cell I showed you in the blood, and they actually increased. But in the blood, they had reduced, suggesting that it's possible that the bone marrow actually has more of these cells to basically do the job, but they're not circulating because they don't need to, because there's less inflammation. And these cells are also changing their function in some ways. So look at this blue circle. These are all cells, different cell types in the bone marrow. These are considered myeloid cells, and their job is often interacting with these other cells to fight cancer, fight infections, and all of that. You see the gray lines, they are how each line tells you that the different cells, how they are talking to each other or interacting. So when you see more lines between two cells, you know that there's more talk between those cells. So you can see that these myeloid cells are mainly interacting with these exhausted cells. The gray lines are at baseline. So before the study, they're mainly interacting with exhausted CD8 T cells. But 1 year later, they're mainly interacting with the cytotoxic T cells and the natural killer cells. These are cells that have enhanced immune fighting properties. So it is a good thing that they're shifting in how they even function. This is one patient on the study before and after was able to stop insulin and be more active and potentially delay his cancer progression too. We also looked at this in mice to say, what if we had mice with smoldering myeloma and we gave half of them a high fiber diet and half of them a standard diet? Do we see any difference? And when I say standard diet, I mean standard mouse diet. So it's not like a Western diet, it's not high fat or high sugar, it's standard diet. And you can see that the mice that got the standard diet, all of them had progressed to myeloma by the end of the experiment, which was 30 weeks. Whereas the mice that got the high fiber diet, half of them had not progressed to myeloma, suggesting that really diet may make a difference, at least in the mice here. We have some trials ongoing for MGUS and smoldering myeloma patients, and this one is actually just completing soon, but this one is going to be open for another year if patients are interested in reaching out. We're looking at a high fiber diet and also looking at supplements like omega-3 and curcumin. I don't have results from these studies yet, but we will. We are doing a study in clonal hematopoiesis, so I'm going to talk about that next. Now shifting gears to myeloid disorders, so thinking about leukemia, pre-leukemia conditions like clonal hematopoiesis, MDS, and acute myeloid leukemia, is it possible again that these factors around diet, the microbiome, insulin resistance affect the risk of progression from these states to cancer? And I think it's through multiple different mechanisms that it could be, and I've shown you many of those in the MGUS smoldering myeloma space. What we do know about diet quality and CHIP or clonal hematopoiesis prevalence is that those who, in the general population, if you look for clonal hematopoiesis, in those with healthy dietary patterns, you actually see that it's about 5%, but those with unhealthy dietary patterns, it's closer to 7%, suggesting there is a difference in the risk on the prevalence of clonal hematopoiesis, which can increase leukemia risk just based on dietary patterns. Also, survival and cardiovascular disease outcomes. So what is the risk of developing? Because we know with clonal hematopoiesis, there's an increased risk of cardiovascular disease or heart attacks. And so do dietary changes in people who already have this CHIP mutations improve risk of cardiovascular disease? And you can see that is true, that healthier diets actually have less cardiovascular disease. And what they defined as healthy was eating more fruits and vegetables and less red meat, processed food, and added salt. So we are doing this study that is opening this week, but we're going to look for participants who have clonal hematopoiesis with a BMI over 25. The study will enroll through Memorial Sloan Kettering, but we may be able to enroll patients through 3 other sites across the country. And the participants will be followed for a year, and we will provide food to some of them and gift cards and coaching to the others at the end of a year. This is just some more details around the study, but we're going to provide meals for 12 weeks and coaching for a year. When we think about just a few more things I wanted to talk about was thinking about in the treatment space. So after a cancer diagnosis develops, can diet help improve outcomes? And this is a tougher area to study, but we do have some studies that suggest this may be possible in other cancers. In the interest of time, I'm just showing you a couple of things around it. But MGUS and smoldering, so the precancer states actually have higher levels of this butyrate short chain fatty acid, whereas the newly diagnosed myeloma have a lower level. And as this means myeloma in complete response, and this means newly diagnosed myeloma. So the myeloma patients who actually responded to treatment and are in a complete response actually have higher levels of butyrate than those who are newly diagnosed. And they validated this in another group of patients and showed that the same thing, that patients who respond better have higher levels of butyrate. We are doing a study in newly diagnosed myeloma. So this is a different blood cancer, but if you know somebody who's been diagnosed, they can reach out if they're interested in enrolling. This is enrolling pretty much nationally. And we want them to reach out very early in their treatment if they want to take part. And then thinking about in the survivorship space, so once a cancer develops and happens, do lifestyle changes actually delay risk of relapse and improve survival? And in the myeloma setting, again, we had patients who had finished their initial chemotherapy. They were on maintenance therapy, and we were following them over time. We wanted to see if there was difference, if the microbiome predicted response. And you can see that participants who had higher diversity, higher butyrate producers, and higher butyrate levels in the stool were more likely to be sustained MRD negative, means be in complete response. So better response when they had better microbiome health. And we further correlated this with diet and saw that there was an association with dietary patterns too, correlating with the levels of butyrate and the response. And flavonoids are basically chemicals from plants that have anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects that were also associating with these butyrate levels. So we think that dietary patterns, even after a diagnosis, may improve the microbiome, affect immune system, and reduce inflammation and improve response to the cancer too. We've just finished this study, and hopefully in the next year we will have results to share. I also want to show you that, diversity correlates with survival very clearly. So if we can enhance and improve our microbiome, potentially we can improve our longevity, our survival, and our risk for cancer. So here are just some general tips based on some of the data I've shown you and the evidence that's out there in the world around dietary patterns and cancer risk and in general health as well. Focusing on whole grains, reducing refined carbohydrates, sugary drinks, increasing fiber intake. The US population gets about 10 to 15 grams. Ideally, you want to get over 30 grams. For sugary foods, the US population basically gets about 17 to 19 teaspoons per day on average. We want to reduce that to less than 6 at least. One When you look at a label, a nutrition label, you'll see sometimes it will say added sugars 12 grams. A quick way to do the math is for every 4 grams or 3.5 grams, it's 1 teaspoon. So if it's 12 grams, that's 3 teaspoons in whatever that serving is that you've eaten. So if you can keep the levels to below 6 to 9 teaspoons a day, I think that's quite significant. A lot of sugars people eat are hidden within cakes, cookies, cereal, and we don't even realize, even drinks like sodas and coffee, where we don't realize how much sugar we're taking in. Plant sources of protein also have fiber, so they're really good sources. And then thinking about unsaturated fats, nuts and seeds, olive oil, avocados, fish, and then fermented foods can also be a good way. Calorie counting and restriction, I think, are very difficult to sustain long term, and also do not take into account diet quality. It's important to plan meals sometimes in advance, because when we are really hungry, we're not going to pick the healthiest option, any one of us, because it takes time and we really want to get something into us. So regular meal times is important, and not to wait until one is starving, ensuring adequate hydration, learning to read ingredient lists and nutrition labels. Gradual changes are more sustainable, and making healthy swaps. So if you can't do all of it, and you want to make simple swaps where you think about like, okay, I like eating a burger, but I'm going to eat a black bean burger instead of a hamburger. Or I like eating pasta and I'm going to pick a red sauce with veggies instead of a white sauce with meat, for example. So these are small changes, but they can go a long way. Maybe a curry with tofu instead of chicken or meat can also be another way to add fiber into the diet. So another issue is people say like, oh, I don't live near a grocery store. It's going to be very hard to get fresh fruits and vegetables. I also don't have time for getting it every day. You don't need fresh fruits and vegetables to get the benefits, even if they are frozen, or that's fine. And they can be just as healthy because they are picked right when they're fresh and then frozen. So they actually retain nutritional value really well. We're not talking about like it has to even be salads or any of that. Like you can have cooked foods, but trying to get the fiber intake. I wanted to explain and just show you where fiber comes from because often people don't fully know where it comes from. Typically in the Western diet, you're really not getting any fiber other than in the unprocessed plant foods. So this person, hypothetically, would, if they ate a bag of broccoli, that's where they got their fiber from. And maybe the potato. But if you're eating a high fiber diet, like all foods have fiber, which are plant foods, and you can reach that and exceed that number very well. Whereas with protein requirements, you can see that many people will say, like, you're talking about a high fiber diet, but will this person get enough protein if they're going to eat mostly plant foods? Remember, plant foods also have protein. So 1 cup of lentils has 18 grams of protein. A cup of black beans, 15 grams. So it is possible when you add it up in the day with all different foods to get enough protein as well on a high fiber diet. And I think it's really important that I've talked about general principles of good nutrition, but it has to be individualized, like what stage, what age, what interest is there at the time when you're doing this, if you're receptive or you feel overwhelmed, if you're dealing with issues related to the cancer or other metabolic conditions, and whether you're a person who likes to make changes gradually or immediately and all at once. Often when patients make it all at once, they may not have learned the principles of how to eat differently, and then they may feel hungry all the time because they're not sure what to eat yet. And I don't think that is sustainable. So you have to know yourself and really try to make these swaps over time. And these are some foods that can have high protein too, but also have fiber and calories. And sometimes when we drink calories, we can get more calories if that's an issue where we need to gain weight. If we need to lose weight, then we want to avoid that and reduce drinking calories and focus more on eating calories. Cooked foods also make it easier for us to eat. So if you eat a cup of spinach that's raw versus a cup of spinach that's cooked, you're going to eat way more spinach when it's cooked because it just shrinks and it's easier to eat that, right? So cooked food, it's a way to get more calories in sometimes as well. And this is just, a patient support group. When I had given this talk in the past, like they met and together they created this 30 plants per week challenge to support each other in improving dietary quality. So it's a way of gamifying it and thinking about it. And for each day they put a line or a color, and you can see that they're trying to see if they can get to 30 per week. So I think dietary effects are very much throughout our body and system, not just for weight, not just for insulin and diabetes, but inflammation, the microbiome, short chain fatty acids, and potentially cancer risk too. So sources of fiber, which I sometimes joke but think is like an immune therapy, are things like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, seeds, and nuts, if we can try to prioritize them on our plate. So with that, I'd like to thank you. If you have questions, happy to take them. But this research cannot be done alone. I have a really strong team that I work with, collaborators, and would like to thank all of them, as well as the participants of these studies and the funding sources to be able to do this work.
Okay, so the first question we got was around stevia, and someone had a related question further down. So they're wondering, as you speak about the sugar level and the guidance there, what about aspartame, stevia, other alternative sugars like honey? What are your thoughts on that?
So sugar has many names and many forms. When you do look at also ingredient labels, sometimes companies do this thing to be a bit devious in the sense that they will use 3 or 4 types of sugar. So they'll put like maple syrup and honey and then brown sugar or something else, and then or some rice syrup or something that they've used. And when an ingredient label, basically the first ingredient is the most frequent ingredient, and then it goes in less frequency. So if they didn't do that and they used only one source of sugar, it would be the first ingredient. But they don't want to do that because they don't want to bring attention to it. So they basically put 3 or 4 different sugar types, and then they are all each less frequent. But when you actually total them, they're all going to be high. So that's why you can look at the ingredient label where it says added sugars, and then they will have to add all those up into that and tell you what it is. So I think that it doesn't matter what kind of sugar, it is still sugar. So when it's maple syrup or it's honey or it's other kinds of natural sugars, agave syrup, those are all still sugar, and we should treat it as such in terms of the risk and reducing consumption. So I'm not saying all of us can like completely eliminate it. It's difficult and we all want it, but like we can reduce the amount of sugar we need. Like maybe if we're baking something and it requires 6 cups, maybe we make it with 3 cups. And as our taste buds adapt, I'm a big believer in that because I see that on our study and for myself too. As we start eating less sugar or we eat change our food, our palates change very significantly too. So we start craving the foods that then we like or we find. So like my own personal experience, when I've started eating less sweet foods, when I will eat something that's very sweet, I actually don't enjoy it anymore because now I'm used to less sweet or less sugar in things that's added. So it might take some time where initially your taste buds are like, no, it's not sweet enough, but just give it time and it will adapt to this new normal because the taste buds wake up. So that's one thing. And then when we talk about artificial sweeteners, the research on it is very mixed, but it does seem that people who use artificial sweeteners, it's not like they are losing weight or maintaining normal weight. Often because those sugars are sometimes sweeter than the others, they lead to more cravings and people eating more or wanting more of those sugary drinks. So if it works for somebody and they say like they absolutely need it and it's working to help them, that's fine. But there are studies that it affects the microbiome, potentially cancer risk and things. So I don't think about them as like, okay, they don't have the effects or the problems as sugar and we can use them as much as we want and it doesn't matter. I think they still have problems too. So we need to be cautious with them as well.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Lots of great questions here, so I'll just keep going. Actually, related to retraining our palates, the person had a question about kids, and so I'm thinking about my kiddo who is very, interested in sugars these days. So I need to work with him. This is a question about any suggestions for kids who can be picky with eating a ton of variety. So thinking about that 30 plants a day, is there anything that can be supplemented to help? Powdered greens, fiber powder, anything else, or is it really not useful to use these types of supplements?
So it's a really good point, and it's unfortunate or sad, like the world we live in, there's always a kids menu, and the kids menu is the most unhealthy. And we basically, even how much ever you try, like the kids are going into the world and basically being given these few very palate limiting options. But I think at home, when you can try to get them to eat the same foods as you do from a young age, then that helps improve their ability to enjoy a variety of different tastes and flavors. What you can do is start with small things. So like if there's something they really like they like pancakes or something, maybe think about a healthier version. Like you can make pancakes with bananas and oats and things like that. So basically the sweetness is coming from the fruit and then you're making it. So while it's still a pancake, it is a healthier version of it. And the same thing you can do with other foods. So if they really like mac and cheese, then think about, can you make mac and cheese with um, banza or something? Would they be willing to try that? So it would be like a chickpea pasta, or would they be willing to try it with, if you make a white sauce which is with nutritional yeast and soy milk or something, like a plant-based version of it. So it does take a little bit of learning both how to cook like this and also how to get the people to enjoy it. but it's a slow process of like trial and error, I think, and not trying to change everything at once. Maybe a small part on the plate or mixing it in. Like if you're going to make something that they really like with meat in a stew, maybe make half meat and half beans instead of just all meat. So now they've started like getting the used to the flavor of beans now, and then you can slowly increase the quantity of beans. I think things like that are ways to maybe try. And then finding what they really like. Last thing I wanted to say was you asked about supplements and fiber supplements. The challenge is that they're not the same as food. So if somebody just will not take fiber, like eat fiber rich foods, maybe they are better than not doing it at all. But there is, when we take fiber supplements, they're often like one type of fiber, and that doesn't have the same effect on the microbiome. Plant foods also have vitamins, minerals, flavonoids. The fiber supplements don't have any of that. And in general, children, patients, and humans, we're not good at taking supplements all the time. If we change dietary patterns, we actually empower ourselves for a lifetime, because then we can do that all the time, and then we start enjoying the taste of those foods.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's helpful. While we're on the topic of fiber, I'm just jumping around to try to consolidate.
Yeah.
But is the total volume of fiber in grams per day, or the proportion of fiber or slash complex carbs compared to less good carbohydrates, the most important to develop your microbiome?
Um, it's a good question. In terms of the total, like when I was talking about 30 grams of fiber, I'm talking about the total grams of dietary fiber per day. So the more dietary fiber you can get, and 25 to 30, I think is like, we don't really know what the upward ceiling limit of fiber is. And I think our ancestors probably were getting 100 grams of fiber a day, right? So when we talk about trying to get 30 grams, we are currently at 10 grams. So even that, like, I think people who are 100% plant-based may be getting 60, 70 grams of fiber a day. And so when we're talking about 20, 30 grams, it's not the ceiling limit that we only want to get that. We want to try to get at least that and more. Yeah, so did I answer the question?
I
And then
think so. There was, yeah,
the
the
proportion
ratio.
of
Yeah.
fiber to complex carbs. So sometimes you can see on, again, on the ingredient label, it will say total carbohydrates and then fiber. So you can calculate, like, this is a little more complex, but you want less of the refined carbs and you want more of the complex carbs or the fibers. So things like glycemic index of a food will give you some of that information too, if you want to calculate it.
Okay. Thanks. Let's see. Oh, related to limits of things. So someone was asking, I was thinking about this too. There's a craze around protein. Women especially need to take a ton of have a ton of protein in their diet. Someone was wondering, is there such a thing as too much protein? How do you think about protein in this way?
So there was one study that was done in older in just looking at protein intake and cancer risk. And what they showed was that actually people who had lower protein diets had less cancer than those with a higher. Now, that was just one study, and it's hard to say that it's something that definitely holds true always. But I do think that when we try to focus so much around protein, then we are eating mainly animal rich foods because we think that those are rich in protein. So we are losing the benefits of fiber because we're not getting enough of those calories. Also, protein rich foods, when they're coming from animal sources, and population studies have shown increased inflammation, increased IGF-1, increased mortality around more animal protein. Just if for substituting basically plant protein for animal protein, there is a more like a survival benefit over time. So I think that tells you that we should not focus so much on protein that we forget the other aspects. And I do think, like, if you think of the US population, we already get double the protein that we need, and we get half the fiber that we need. So that just tells you where most people need to focus. We are still so obsessed with the protein aspect because that's kind of what we hear in terms of like advertising in the media and everything. But if you can really change that focus of yours, if you are eating a healthy diet, you will pretty much get enough protein. You need to worry about protein if you basically are not able to eat enough, not getting calories because you're having trouble with eating, or if somebody is really a bodybuilder or something, they're trying to build muscle, then that little bit more protein might help them optimize it. But many times people are eating so much protein but not exercising that the protein's just getting lost in the urine. Like we don't retain or hold on to protein, and we're not going to keep it unless we do the exercise or the work to actually build the muscle to hold it, right? So that's the other aspect of it too, that if you want to eat more protein and build muscle, it's not, the protein is helps. If you're eating 0.8 grams or 1 gram or 1.2 grams, it's helping optimize it a little. But the main work to build that muscle is not about how much protein you eat, it's about how much exercise you do.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. I want to highlight that we're over time. Are you doing okay, Dr. Shaw, for a few more minutes? There are a lot of
I could
questions
stay a
though.
few more minutes and then that would be
Okay,
fine.
yeah.
Maybe
I
15
know
minutes.
you
Yeah.
are busy. Let me see if I can answer a couple more questions, and then perhaps we can try to answer some of these questions in writing later or offline. So, because everyone's so curious, and there are a lot of comments that your talk was really good and informative. So I think people are just really excited to hear more. So I thought this was a nice question. Someone had to take a lot of antibiotics as a child, and now their gut microbiome is terrible. Even had it tested. So they were told they could never really rebuild it. Do you have any thoughts about a way to rebuild it?
I disagree that they cannot rebuild it. We just showed you in the study that we have built microbiome and seen changes in patients. I think few of the principles that we've talked about, fermented foods, fiber-rich foods, variety of plant foods, if you can try to ensure that you're doing all of these three things, and then if you still have gut problems, then that is something to say, like, is it a certain food that you're not digesting well, or there's some allergy to, or other aspects like some nutritional deficiency or something else that needs to be managed, or some medical diagnosis. But before saying that the microbiome cannot be healed, I think we need to make sure we are doing these three principles. And if we're doing them and then we are still not able to, then I think we need to look more at other medical reasons or other things, whether we need to add certain supplements or do things like that.
Sounds good. Any thoughts about either Pediasure milk for children? Do you know much about that as a,
I don't, but I don't
yeah,
know about this one specifically, but I'll say like
yeah.
in adults, people use Ensure and many of these drinks that are basically high protein or high calorie drinks. I think they're very synthetic. They often have added sugar. They have, they're not really made. They're made to get enough calories in somebody who's not eating, but they're not like, okay, they're trying to look at the best kinds of calories. So if you can make a smoothie which has fruits, vegetables. If you want more protein, you can actually blend in silken tofu, for example. Like it will make it creamy, but it will also add protein. Stuff like that. Add flax seeds, chia seeds into it. Then I think that's a much better way to get the calories. If you cannot do that and a person's really not eating and they need it, then I think, or a certain medical condition that absolutely needs it, I think that's a different issue.
Okay, that sounds good. Any thoughts about organic versus not organic making a difference?
Yeah. So I would say that it, organic versus not organic is like an icing on the cake. Like the main thing is eating like the cake part, which is basically eating the plant foods or eating healthy foods. And then the organic, maybe there is a slight more benefit, but it's more important to get the plant foods than worry about organic and not eat them. So for example, one study looked at and said, how many less cancer cases would we have if people just increase their diet quality by adding one serving of fruit and vegetable a day? And they said it was like thousands of cancers less. And if suppose those were not organic foods and there were pesticides in it, how much increased cancer would be there? It was like you can count on one or two hands, like the number that they think. So it's like you would reduce many thousands of cancer where you may increase maybe a handful of it if you're not eating organic, according to that math or study. But that is also just like an estimate. Studies that have looked at like people's diet and said like organic foods, some have shown that organic foods maybe reduce cancer risk. I think that is also because people who eat organic foods are eating more plant foods, are exercising more, they are living healthier lifestyles. So how much if it is truly the organic versus not? I think that if organic feels too expensive, then don't worry about it and just ensure you're getting enough plant foods. If you think that you can spend and you want to do the organic, maybe there is a little bit more of a benefit. But I would not eat plant foods because you're worried about organic.
Great, thank you. I think we hit most of the questions, and I know I've kept you more than just a couple of minutes.
Totally fine.
So I will promise the audience that I'll go back through all the questions, and if there's anything that we didn't touch, I will see if we can't get an answer for you in writing. Thank you so much, Dr. Shah, for your time, and this was huge. I think we've got lots of compliments in the chat, and I'm really appreciative of what I learned today for the community. So we will share the recording, and we'll be in touch with all of the registrants with that. And with that, we hope to see you again soon. And this is great work. Congrats on all your success so far. I know this is not an easy place to get funding to to research. So you've done so well. So thank you for all of this.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Really nice to meet a different community and talk about these topics. I do think these are important topics, and you hit it really clearly that funding is the biggest challenge to do these studies. So as we want to do them in more populations and different, like that's the limiting factor, basically. Like every time I give these talks, patients always reach out and say, can we join a study? But if we don't have a study specific to that population, it is hard to basically say like, yes, we can. And usually it's the funding challenges that limit it and slow it down. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll do our best, and we'll keep talking about whether we can do this for the community, and we have our X Out Cancer campaign going on right now to continue raising funds to support research. So thank you, Dr. Shah. Have a lovely day, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Sounds great.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.